Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of Ink to Impact, the podcast where we dive deep into the stories that shape our world in sometimes uncomfortable ways. I'm Emily, your host, and today we're visiting the Soma-filled utopia as described in Brave New World, the book by Aldous Huxley, not the Marvel movie that comes out in February. Starting with the author, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World was under fire when it was published in 1932. It received accusations from multiple authors, including George Orwell, author of 1984, to have plagiarized another book called We. Huxley denied this till his death, but it's notable that the dystopian government in We by Yevgeny Mayatin, I have no idea if I pronounced that right, is called the One State, whom controls everything with an unforgiving structure, while Brave New World's government is called the World State, and it emphasizes conformity. So take that as you will. Brave New World is also compared a lot to 1984. Though while the message of 1984 could be summarized as showing how fear controls people, Brave New World is better summarized as describing how pleasure controls people. Positive reinforcement versus negative reinforcement. Because, after all, how do you escape if you don't want to escape? Something important for context is that the universe of Brave New World is written likely as an exaggerated form of the European view of American society in the 1930s. Think of the book as an alternate history where America pulled a Britain and took over everything, resulting in the proliferation of 1930s ideas like eugenics, consumerism, and atheism. The universe of Brave New World is so cartoonishly capitalistic that at one point characters express horror at the idea of simple games like tag because they don't require you to buy anything to play them. In the book, they worship Henry Ford, the founder of the Ford Motor Company, and eliminated the French and German languages. One last thing I want to note, just because it's interesting, is how a central piece to Brave New World is their caste system, which involves genetically modifying the working class to be of less intelligence. DNA had not been discovered at the time the book was written. However, the process Huxley describes is remarkably similar to what we can do today, making this book arguably more relevant as time passes rather than less. What I'd like to analyze today is how a rebel character changes or disrupts the existing state of societal, familial, or political affairs. In this case, I'll be looking at the motivations of John the Savage and Aldous Huxley's purpose in writing him. John is an obvious rebel. There is a great contrast between the way he grew up, where he learned from a tattered copy of the complete works of Shakespeare, and believed strongly in concepts like honor and suffering, as seen by how he insists on earning Lenina's love before attempting to sleep with her, despite how she'd like to skip that part, and the way people who live in the world state grew up, conditioned to mindlessly recite phrases like ending is better than mending, a reference to how they view life with such a little meaning that they'd rather die than experience the suffering of old age. Through the juxtaposition, Huxley highlights the way the world state sacrifices depth and authentic emotion for stability and superficial happiness. Because while the real world works on a scale of moral to immoral, the world of the world state instead acts on a scale of unhappiness to happiness, with unhappiness being treated as taboo. But more than that, Huxley uses John's upbringing as a way to make him a vessel of the sensibilities of the reader. John's childhood was hard, but it taught him to value life and passion. So when he finally reaches the world state, he's terribly disillusioned by the artificial comforts of conformity. He views the world state's values as shallow and dehumanizing, when compared with how he was raised with Shakespeare's words in his ears. So John internalized his ideals of love and suffering that stand in direct opposition to the world state's utilitarian ideas of happiness. When offered the pleasures of the world state, John can't accept its total rejection of genuine human experiences. John's insistence of the necessity of suffering is rooted in his belief that hardship is essential to growth and individuality. Huxley uses this to enforce the idea that total happiness isn't as important as meaning, because happiness without meaning is meaningless. John's rebellion reaches its climax in his confrontation with Mustafa Mond, the world controller. Their conversation reveals the philosophical core of what Huxley wants to convey, as John defends the need for ideas like religion against Mond's ultra-pragmatic defense of stability and comfort. John repeatedly claims that he wants real danger, encapsulating Huxley's purpose of proving that true humanity requires a balance of joy and suffering, freedom and responsibility. John's rejection of the world state's values is the ultimate message of the novel's critique of a society that loses authenticity for convenience. Now I will read a page of Brave New World, where Mustafa Mond and John the Savage have an argument. Exposing what is mortal and unsure to all that fortune, death, and danger dare, even for an eggshell. Isn't there something in that? He asked, looking up at Mustafa Mond. Quite apart from God, though of course God would be a reason for it. Isn't there something in living dangerously? There's a great deal in it, the controller replied. Men and women must have their adrenals stimulated from time to time. What? Questioned the savage, uncomprehending. It's one of the conditions of perfect health. That's why we made the VPS treatments compulsory. VPS? Violent Passion Surrogate. Regularly, once a month, we flood the whole system with adrenaline. It's the complete physiological equivalent of fear and rage. All the tonic effects of murdering Desdemona and being murdered by Othello without any of the inconvenience. But I like the inconveniences. We don't, said the controller. We prefer to do things comfortably. But I don't want comfort. I want God. I want poetry. I want real danger. I want freedom. I want goodness. I want sin. In fact, said Mustafa Mond, you're claiming the right to be unhappy. All right then, said the savage defiantly. I'm claiming the right to be unhappy. Not to mention the right to grow old and ugly and impotent, the right to have syphilis and cancer, the right to have too little to eat, the right to be lousy, the right to live with a constant apprehension of what may happen tomorrow, the right to catch typhoid, the right to be tortured by unspeakable pains of every kind. There was a long silence. I claim them all, said the savage at last. Mustafa Mond shrugged his shoulders. You're welcome, he said. In this reading, I made a couple deliberate choices. Mustafa Mond is condescending. He is self-assured in his belief of the world state. He's been in it long enough to be jaded by the system and to know, based on evidence that he found himself, that this is the only way to have a stable society. So Mustafa speaks perhaps a little bit slow and definitely very condescendingly. He speaks self-assured and self-confident. John, on the other hand, is earnest and a little bit desperate to be understood. He spent so long feeling isolated not only from the Savage Reservation, but he also felt isolated from the world order when he joined it. He spent so long feeling isolated that anything less than complete understanding frustrates him. John's continuous, complete disbelief in his tone is a result of how every new thing he learns about the world state continues to baffle him. Notably, when Mustafa mentions the VPS treatments, that even their anger is regulated, it completely just baffles John. As always, thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed what you've heard today, please consider subscribing to this podcast. Until next time, this is your host, Emily, signing off. Here is a blooper reel of me trying to pronounce that one name. By Yevgeniza Myatin. Yevgeniza Myatin. Yevgeny Yevgeny Zamai.